Kurz vorstellen von dem zweiten Redner, Herrn Professor Bono. Er ist momentan, ist natürlich Gastprofessor, aber eigentlich an der Sophia Universität, japanischen Georgie-Leiter. Er ist eine Kokusai-Kyoyo-Jüre des international. Kono ist eine Seltenheit unter einem japanischen Akademiker, der gleich nach dem Abschluss von Oberschule nach Amerika gegangen und dort Bachelor und Master und sogar ab dem Masterkurs hat er in Princeton, berühmte Universität, Abschluss gemacht und dann weiter promoviert, auch in Princeton Universität. Und so in Amerika sagt man PhD heißt das. Ne? Und dann kehrt er zurück nach Japan und seitdem ist die Georgie-Universität. Und sein Schwerpunkt, ganz abstrakt gesagt, formuliert, sogenannten Komparatistik. Also, in diesem Bereich hat er auch eine Dissertation auch geschrieben. Ich habe bekommen Literary Reactions to the Cult of Facts in Morioka und Virginia Woolf. Also typisch komparatistische Arbeit. Und wie jetzt in diesem Titel schon angedeutet wurde, ein Teil von seinem Schwerpunkt ist Morioka, bekannter japanischer Schriftsteller. Und deswegen ist er extra wahrscheinlich nach Deutschland gekommen, um weiter seine Forschung fortzusetzen vielleicht. Und vielleicht hat er verschiedene Materialien gesammelt mit dabei. Und auch er hat in Deutschland den DAF oder Hörmeister, Und heute spricht er doch etwas anderes und sein zweiter Schwerpunkt Kritik überhaupt. In Japan gibt es dann eine bestimmte Gattung Kritik, oft Bunge-Shogun heißen eher literarisch orientierte Kritiker. Das war eine Szene mit einer bestimmten Zeitschrift. Und die gegenwärtige Situation der Kritik in Japan. Gegenwärtig heißt ganz heute bekannte Kritiker oder Philosophen oder Literaten, Literaturkritiker und so weiter. Diese Szene stellt er vor gleichzeitig und vielleicht seine eigene Analyse oder seine eigene Kritik können wir hören. Aber auf Englisch. So,
vielen Dank. Ich möchte auf Englisch sprechen. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I wish to thank the Japanologie section of the Vortragssprache Institute for hosting me as guest professor. And I would like to thank Professor Richter, Professor Kobayashi, Professor Kuhn for your friendship and stimulating intellectual dialogues. And so today, I'd like to talk about the outside of reflexivity and media in contemporary Japanese criticism. And you have a handout in Japanese. My presentation today is part of a project on understanding contemporary Japanese criticism,批評, in the context of Japanese studies in Europe and the US. And as a window into the state of public discourse and the intellectual life in post-bubble Japan. I translated this book entitled Otaku Japan's Database Animals with Jonathan E. Abel. This is written by Hiroki Azuma, one of the most influential young critic in Japan. And since the publication of this translation, I've been involved in international dialogue about different approaches to Japanese popular culture and contemporary Japanese society, and involving Azuma, another critic in Japan, Miyadai Shinji, and also scholars outside Japan, such as Professor Richter here. Professor Richter appeared in one of the books that was edited by Asuma, and I also contributed. I thought that my current project is to open up this genre in Japan called Hihyo to wider context, and I was thinking of maybe 2 points. The first is to open up the history of Hihyo into context outside of Japan. Hihyo has always been open to outside context, but especially since 1980s, Hihyo genre has really begun to open up into the flow of text, ideas, and people. This began with the journal called Hihyo Kukan. That was a major critical journal of the 1990s. But another important point here is representation of critical discourse intertwined with the image of Japan, so-called Nihon Jindon or Nihon Bunkanon. And when the critics represent their work to the outside world, it begins to intertwine with the so-called discourse on the Japanese about the characteristics of Japanese culture or Japanese people. And many scholars in and outside of Japan find this discourse to be very problematic, while Japanese people very much like talking about who Japanese are and so on. And you see that how criticism is represented outside of Japan intertwined with this discourse. And that's one point. And the second point is the role of intellectuals in a shifting media and social environment. In Japan, the stage for cultural, social, and critical discourse has expanded from just print media into different publishing venues, such as self-published magazines or doujinshi, or internet media such as blogs, Twitter, and internet broadcasts such as Ustream and YouTube. This critical development is difficult to understand if we take for granted the sphere of public discourse in a conventional way, such as newspaper and literary journals. So we need to take into account this development. And so we need a perspective in which we can understand these new criticism developing in the new media. As a reference point, I want to bring up two works that introduce contemporary Japanese criticism since 1990s. One is in English, Contemporary Japanese Thoughts, published from Columbia University Press, edited by a scholar in the US, Richard Kaihman. This book was intended as a critical intervention of non-Western scholars into English language. And contributors include Kan Sang-jun, a Korean resident in Japan and a scholar of international relations, and philosopher Takashi Tetsuya, and Karatani Koji, and sociologist Ueno Chizuko. And dealing with such issues as history issues with neighboring nations, or gender issues, or nationalism. These are heavyweight issues. But I think this selection by Kaihman fails to give a whole picture of contemporary discourse. And in that sense, I want to turn to this book in Japanese called 日本の批評, Criticism in Japan by critic Sasaki Atsushi. This is published in 2009. And this starts with the so-called new academism of Asada Akira and Nakada Shinichi of 1980s, and goes through Karatani, and then discusses more of the so-called subculture criticism, subculture hihyo, such critics as Miyadai Shinji, Otsuka Eiji, and Fukuda Kazuya, and then moving on to Azuma Hiroki in the year 2000. So, on the one hand, Sasaki's account introduced more of these popular critics, but this criticism alone would give a more of an insular perspective, in the sense that it's just a Japanese domestic perspective and doesn't discuss what it means to the outside world. So my strategy is to think about two concepts. One is post-modernity, postmodern, and the other reflexivity as a key concept in introducing Japanese criticism to opening up Japanese criticism to wider context. And to that end, I'd like to talk about a discourse of Miyadai Shinji today. And it's actually a two-part talk, and the second part I will give at a good university in Frankfurt next week. But today I'll talk about the section on the Miyadai Shinji and the notion of reflexivity. So let's move on to this main part of my talk. The notion of the postmodern has experienced a worldwide boom in critical theory around 1980 with Jean-François Lyotard, La Condition Postmoderne, and Frederick Jameson's series of essays since 1982 that culminate in postmodernism and the critical logic of late capitalism. In Japan, the concept experienced a boom with Asada Akira's bestseller Kouzou to Chikara, Structure and Power, 1983, and the so-called new academism of the 1980s. However, as the debates on postmodernity has subsided in Western theoretical discourse, and Japan entered a long period of stagnation, often referred to as the lost decade, the significance of the postmodern has also waned. To make the long story short, such ideas as the end of history or the free-flowing signifier of those concepts often discussed in the context of the postmodern simply do not resonate anymore with the current political and economic climate in advanced nations, including Japan. So when we read theoretical texts about postmodernity today, such as a book edited by Miyoshi and Hartunian called Postmodernism in Japan, it kind of reads like a historical document because the historical situation has changed so much. But it does not mean that the underlying philosophical issues discussed in conjunction with the postmodern have simply disappeared. In fact, some of the issues discussed in conjunction with the postmodern has intensified ever since. And the postmodern debate seems to anticipate such contemporary issues. And then I would like to turn to the idea of reflexivity. To examine how the notion of the postmodern played out in Japanese context, it is interesting to read Miyadai Shinji's critique of Hihyo Kukan, the prominent critical journal co-edited by Asada Akira and Karatani Koji in the 1990s, in the presentation in the spring of 2009. here, this is in the third volume of Shiso Chizu, if you're interested. Here Miyadai argues that he co-wrote Subculture Shinwa Kaitai, or the Dismantling the Subculture Myth, in 1993 to counter the gloomy phenomenon called the critique of the postmodern that was popular among the Hihyokukan circle. Here Miyadai says that he understands the postmodern not as a discourse, as in postmodernism, but as a condition of social structure, and therefore it is useless to argue against it. Sociologists tend to call it late modernity, while critics of literature and architecture tend to identify it as postmodernity, but they're basically talking about the same thing. And what Karatani critiqued was a discourse, an awareness of this condition, but it's impossible to overcome the condition simply by critiquing it. Miyadai then recalled Michel Foucault's interview in 1966, published in the journal La Quinzaine littéraire. And Foucault, this is one of the critique against Jean-Paul Sartre's idea of subjectivity. And he says that such notions as subjectivity and freedom are but effects of a system. When the interviewer asked if such comment of Foucault would allow him to go beyond the system, Foucault says, it's a process that looks like trying to step on one's own shadow. So when you try to approach the system, you're always constrained by the system behind it. So when you try to grab the system, then you're already controlled by the system behind it. And then when you try to grab that system, and then so it's kind of like a perpetual forward movement, right? You will never arrive at the whole system, but you need to continue trying to step on your own shadow. This perpetual forward movement that Miyadai described here through Foucault's interview is what he elsewhere elaborates as reflexivity. And Miyadai formulates such issues as self-referentiality, the decline of grand narrative, and the loss of self-evident foundation, which had been discussed in conjunction with the postmodernity through the notion of reflexivity. Miyadai formulates this through sociological theories of Niklas Luhmann and Anthony Giddens. And it's somewhat complicated to explain here. And he is such a prolific writer. He is an author of a dozen books. And he often talks about these issues in connection with ongoing social issues. So it's very difficult to grasp what he's saying. But if you read closely, you're able to discern the formulation of his theory. Let me try to do that. In his recent writings, Miyadai writes about Luhmannian, coming from Niklas Luhmann, Luhmannian reflexivity, and the Giddensian, coming from Anthony Giddens, reflexivity. In the afterwards to the paperback edition of the Dismantling the Subculture Myth, he summarizes the distinction as follows. Luhmannian reflexivity, originally derived from a mathematical concept, is based on the social systems theory, in which self-evident assumptions have disappeared. Meanwhile, Giddensian reflexivity, originally derived from linguistics, refers to the existential situation in which one's action inevitably replaces what is already known about oneself through counseling, news analysis, and so on. This is very short and very dense and difficult to understand, so let's elaborate. Miyadai explained this concept of reflexivity elsewhere in the essay Transformation of Semantics in the History of Japanese Subculture since 1992, the essay that you read in the master's course today. He explains the Luhmannian reflexivity as follows. In the late period of the age of the self, reflexivity increases. Earlier, there had been a difference in priority between reality and fiction. Of course, reality was superior to fiction. However, as a method to juxtapose reality and fiction as functionally equivalent, became generally accepted. Irony, the act of kicking away the ladder or ungrounding, spread. Such irony relativizes all kinds of messages, for example, by pointing out that the seemingly self-evident assumption is but something chosen by an individual. This results in an increase in reflexivity. Reflexivity, according to Nicholas Luhmann, is a situation where the presupposition for a choice is something that has already been chosen. So, and Miyada has a long footnote to this passage, and here Miyada tried to explain this through Luhmann's formulation of reflexivity in a theoretical text called Social Systems. Basically, Miyadai explained this situation in which there is no firm grounding, no set of proposition that everybody can agree on. This is the infinite process of trying to discover the assumption, and he calls it the quagmire of reflexivity. And he talks about the example of internet discussion, and he talks about 2channel, internet bulletin board, and he says, he used this phrase, お前もな, right? So YouTube, right? So, so one guy said, you're stupid, and then the other guy said, お前もな, you are YouTube, right? And so whatever anybody says, because it's an anonymous field, there is no firm ground, and everybody is susceptible to critique. So there is no ground, no set of assumption. And this Miyada explains through Luhmann's social theory. Meanwhile, Miyada explained in the afterword to Dismantling Subculture Myths that Gidensian reflexivity refers to the fact that what the younger want and see as being themselves is already saturated by what the media offers for themselves. Again, Miyada explains this through Japanese context. Right? So the phrase that Miyada uses is これって私, which means that, oh, this is me. Right? So those young girls try to be themselves and try to express who they are. But what they wear in terms of clothing and hair and so on, it's whatever is in the magazine or what's talked about on TV, right? So whatever they want to do out of their own free will has already been described in the magazines and TV. So that's what Anthony Giddens talks about through reflexivity, according to Miyadai. So this book, Dismantling the Subculture Myths, is a very important text in terms of the history of Japanese popular culture. It talks about, it documents the history of wide-ranging popular culture realms, such as manga, pop music, and pornography, and examine the consumption patterns of popular culture through extensive statistical analysis. And he uses this concept of the relationship model. So the self-image of one's relationship. And he classifies different modes of consumption in this way. So what happens is whatever the relationship model that these young women subscribe to, the prototype of that is already in the magazines or the media. Right? So it's a reflexive process. And what's interesting here is that Miyada uses categories that are already in the media. So, for example, he used a category, Niha. So those girls who like what everybody like. Right? Nihilisto, the nihilist. Right? Or the bankara, the unrefined, like the like the boys who don't pretend not to care about their own clothing, right? Bankara, or the nekura, the gloomy type, or yorikakari, the boys and girls who are dependent on their friends. So they create, those young people create their own image of how they relate to other people through these categories, like, oh, I'm Niha, so I act like Niha, right? But the problem here is that, first of all, these images are already in the popular media, like magazines. And second of all, Miyadai uses these categories already in his statistical analysis. So when he formulates questionnaire, like, how many hours do you spend in the karaoke? Or what kind of song do you sing? And then, they respond with a variety of songs, right? But how they classify these songs are already informed by the pre-knowledge of these categories. So what I'm trying to explain here is that Miyadai's own sociological research is already a reflexive process that uses what's available in the media. And actually, Miyadai has been criticized about or questioned in terms of his sociological method. For example, Ueno Chizuko has a critique afterward in the paperback or Bunko edition, and also there's an article in Shiso Chizu about sociological method of these critics. Miyadai talks about Gidensian criticism, Gidensian reflexivity, but it's not only about social conditions of those young girls, but also Miyadai's own critical discourse. And so this reflects, when we talk about reflexivity, it's this is the environment that Japanese young people find themselves, but also the environment that Japanese critics find themselves, right? There are unintended consequences of what these critics say. So, okay. Let me move on to the observations. So, I introduced only briefly the sociological concepts and tools Miyadai employs in his influential studies of Japanese popular culture. Indeed, the popularity of Miyadai's writing and his performance as an advocate of youth culture, even in the risque field of young women's sexuality, made him a media star in the mid-1990s. His criticism proved to be very influential amongst young critics who became very influential themselves in the year 2000s, such as Suzuki Kensuke and Hamano Satoshi. So some critics, such as Azuma Hiroki, argue that since the 1990s, the work of sociologists, such as Miyadai and Osawa Masachi, that's another sociologist coming out of University of Tokyo program, they've been so influential among the young generation critics that there was indeed a sociological trend, 社会学的展開 in criticism, largely because of Miyadai. And there are others who disagree with calling this shift as sociological. Kirara Akihiro, a sociologist and critic, he co-edited with Azuma this Hishoki, when he was here in Leipzig last year. And he edited this volume called 社会の批評. And he responds to 3 so-called sociological critics, and they are Miyadai, Osawa, and Azuma. Azuma is not a sociologist by trade, but Kitada includes Azuma because Azuma is often referred to as sociological critic. And at the same time, Kitada explores a distinction between the so-called sociological criticism and the academic sociology through his own essay and selection of essays in this volume. So I think Kitada's implicit point is that what so-called sociological criticism is somewhat different from academic sociology. So that's this idea of sociological turnism, one important point. The second point refers to criticism and the new media. The media environment changed dramatically since the end of Hihyokukan. I talked about the proliferation of different media where young critics can express themselves, such as doujinshi, and internet media such as blog and Twitter. Miyadai had his own internet news program called videonews.com, and he's been doing that in the past 10 years. And it's interesting because Miyadai often talked about anti-nuclear power plant movements and issues, problems with nuclear power plants in these programs. Those were not really discussed in the mainstream media, but Miyadai was very persistent with it, and he's been doing it in the past 10 years. So when the accident occurred in 2011, Miyadai had a whole series of critics that he can invite, and I remember watching his video news program, I think 5 days, 1 week after the quake, and Miyadai talked about the so-called worst case scenario, right? Okay, what is the worst thing that could happen? And I think that was really a wake-up call for many people, actually, because a lot of people were not paying attention. So Miyadai had this alternative media, and he's been involved in it. And critics like Azuma used Twitter not only to communicate his ideas, but also to promote his own text. Eigyo that Azuma talks about in his symposium, legendary symposium in 1999. Azuma is really defying conventional wisdom about how one should act as an intellectual, but there's a famous concept in Derrida called misdelivery, right? Gohai. Right? So basically, it's like a letter, but delivered to a wrong person, right? So he likes to say that his texts continue to be delivered to the wrong audience, and he likes to perform and create this situation where his message is delivered to wrong audience, right? So it's a very interesting process to look at. And young critics such as Hamano Satoshi are really good at explaining how the new internet media functions, such as Nico Nico Doga, as some of you saw in the seminar. And Hamano has a very interesting article about how Nico Nico Doga functions, and these young critics are very familiar with how this functions, and I think this is a very important area for research. My third point is particularly relevant to the situation about the anti-nuclear power movement after the Tohoku earthquake in 2011. Miyadai had been vocal in his opposition to the nuclear power plants and the nuclear power establishment that includes the politicians, the academia, and the industry. And he published an article outlining his own prescription for the nuclear power reduction movement. And he's been very active politically, and he formed his own NGO called Green Active. But at the same time, he had been somewhat skeptical of the effect that the demonstration has on the actual politics. So his political action still seems to be taking unintended consequences of reflexivity into account. So the point here is that whatever political action one takes in this environment, they need to take into account this idea of reflexivity. We might recall that one of the key issues in the postmodern debate is whether or not postmodernism lacks the power to effect actual political changes. So it is true that reflexive action will not be straightforward, and the position of the citizens or the intellectuals will be complicated. But at the same time, any political action needs to take into account this idea of reflexivity. Oguma Eiji, another writer, and he is one of the leaders of the demonstration on Fridays, and he wrote this book recently called 社会を変えるには To Change the Society, and it says デモをする社会の可能性を探った本、right? The society that has a demonstration in it, right? But Oguma has a section on the increase in reflexivity in this book. So basically, Oguma is saying that any prescription for effecting social change needs to take into account reflexive reaction. So he outlined a few policy actions where this complexity of reflexivity are taken into account. So this idea of reflexivity has a very important implication in terms of the alternative politics. To conclude, I want to go back to the title of my talk, and that has the word outside in it, outside of reflexivity and media. In Miyadai's critical discourse, I noticed that there is always some excess that goes beyond the premise of reflexivity, that there is no outside to the society, which, while one's own understanding of society is always partial. And Miyadai's political prescription seem often modernist, and some call it neoliberalist. So they ask Japanese people to be rational, responsible citizens, rather than being dependent on the nation state. But at the same time, Miyadai also talks about a transformative power of mimesis, where charismatic, altruistic individuals can change the world by positively influencing others. And it's a puzzling thing because Miyadai talks about, there are those individuals who are altruistic, who can help others, and who have very good intention, and these individuals have this effect, influence to others that I want to emulate. I want to imitate this person, and then this is how he explains how to affect the social change. But this is completely outside of this idea of reflexivity, where everything is so constrained. And Miyadai talks about this in a recent dialogue. He says that there is a big difference between being happy without knowing anything and being happy after having experienced everything, seeing many things, and only those who have experienced many things can see everything as relative and yet have an absolute desire for living that can influence others through mimesis. And he adds that those young people who flock around idols AKB48 in Nichannel are useless because they don't have the transformative power of mimesis. But so there seems to be no theoretical grounding to this mimesis. But Miyadai mentioned this very often. And it is also said that criticism in Japan, or hihyo, is often read as jinsero, or life lessons. And the theoretical value of Miyadai's text can be found elsewhere, as I hope to show in this presentation. But in his desire to try to break from the theoretical mold, he inherits a little of the tradition of criticism as literary criticism, hihyo, bunge hihyo. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, jetzt haben wir hinter uns 2 Vorträge und jetzt wollen wir gemeinsam die Frage und Antwort bzw. Diskussion in Bezug auf Frau Tomias Vortrag zunächst einmal weiter gemacht. Und jetzt, deswegen, ich würde vorschlagen, egal welche Seite, wenn jemand Fragen stellen möchten, bitte entweder an Frau Tomia oder an Prof. Sprachlich ist gemischt, egal auf welche Sprache. Englisch, Japanisch, Deutsch. Dann vielleicht, du musst sowieso was geben.
2 short questions, because we can discuss it afterwards today, I think. Could you a little bit explain more about the problem of reflexivity as the problem of I and me? Yeah? That's me. It's me. And, what I'm looking for, I have already in all the magazines. This is, in my opinion, not only, of course, a problem of Japan, but a problem of modern condition for all societies, I think. And so we have the famous sentence of Althusser, I think. You. Interpellation in English, Anrufung.
Interpellation.
Interpellation.
Yeah.
And there's another good example, I think, given by Kafka. It's already too late, and you cannot do nothing. And so what in this sense does mean outside? Is it related to Japan or related to this dichotomy? Also, the first question, and the second question relates to the problem of the influence and the it's a question about this outside. Recently, I've been reading an article with the students, with the master students from Sophia Loray. And she gives another type of thinking, not cutting between inside and outside, and not using the concepts of me and you, but we. And the outside not as completely outside, but going somewhere, but not cutting the relation to the place where they have been. It's an example from the antique, wie hießen die? Plebea, an example from the Rome Republic. And this was very impressive for me, because in a sense modernity or postmodernism means to question this kind of dichotomy. And me, and that means individualism versus collective and so on. So I'm looking for an answer too, and it's striking for me. On the one side, Miyadai's very impressive knowledge about all these processes in postmodern or Japan after the 80s, and this kind of returning of modernism, of a kind of old-fashioned modernism.
Right. That's right. Okay, so first question, yes, Miyadai draws on Hans Negin's idea of reflexivity, and I think Miyadai would agree that this is this can be seen anywhere, any advanced nations, and where media has developed sufficiently. But Miyadai uses that to analysis of Japanese popular culture since the 80s. So that's the that's the answer to the first question. The second question, I know that the gaibu has a lot of meaning, and it's very problematic in the sense that, spatially speaking, there is no gaibu in postmodernity, right? It's because there is no stable outside point where everything can be grounded.
Stable outside,
right? But
there may be an outside.
Right. So you can look at A from B, or you can look at B from A, and then what you can do is to go back and forth between A and B, or you can look at C from A, and then you can look at B, C from B, and then go back and forth between. That's called paradox, right? And there are different theoretical ways of getting around this issue of outside. What's striking to me is that Miyadai tend to formulate this as an existential issue because he speaks for this anxiety that if there is no ground, if there is no stable outside, then your life is not secure. You don't have the secure feeling about yourself and others. And Miyadai often talks about, okay, how do you live happily in this day and age? And one of the prescription was live there and just every day, like those girls in Shibuya who is sitting on the street and don't care too much about it. Don't ask the philosophical question about your own existence, but not that, right? But he retracted his position.
Does he have a notion or a concept of future? Or
I don't think so.
Outside in terms of was heißt Vorstellung? Imagine.
Yeah. Okay. I think that oftentimes he has this policy prescription about how to change society, like more inclusive, big society, smaller government or something. Other times he speaks in this kind of jinseiron angle, and he would say how to live happily while having sort of stable ground. I mentioned this as a break. I mentioned this as a fissure in his theoretical framework, and I think it's just interesting that way. And I think that interesting aspect is just a function of Hihyo criticism that sort of bridges the popular media and the theoretical text. So, just a short, thanks. Yeah.
So, müsste jemand fragen?どうぞ、遠慮なく。
神谷先生とお聞きしたいんですけれども、2つの疑問があるんです。はい。一つはですね、まず日本で看護師と介護士の仕事としている外国人の生きることなんですけれども、言葉が一つね、やっぱり大事な神になるというふうにおっしゃったんですけれども、それもここで取った免許、日本で認められているか認められてないかということは全然知らないんですけれども、それをちょっとお聞きしたいなと思ったんですけれども、もしその免許が認められている場合でも、その日本語能力を決められます試験を受ける義務は何かありますか？ 何かというと、ドイツの場合、結構遠くから、そういう看護師たちとか、看護師たちとか入ってくるんですけれども、今の法律が変わってきて、もう公の免許、その国家免許とか、それ認められるようになりまして、ですからドイツがそこまでできなくても、一部老人ホームとか、他の施設が仕事ができるんですよ。だから日本はどうなるかということをまずちょっとお聞きしたいんですけれども、もう一つ、まず答えが出ます。すいません。
じゃあ、そこまで一つ、よろしいですか。日本では一切本国での免許を認めていません。もちろんフィリピンですと看護大学、かなりエリートの看護大学を出た人でないと日本に来られないというのが事実なんですけれども、それであっても日本でもう一回取り直しをしろ、しかも日本語で取り直しをしろということで、日本語能力試験1級以上の能力、そうですね、例えば傷っていうのもなんとかそうって言ったりとか、床ずれ寝ていてできちゃうのを褥瘡というとか、東洋漢字にない漢字まで覚えなくてはならない。読めないです。で、それは医学の権威を守ろうという日本人の看護師会の力と今ぶつかっています。ただもう足りなくなるのは明らかなので、少なくとも、試験を英語にしようとか、振り仮名を全部振ろうとか、振り仮名を振るというところまでぐらいは言ったかもしれません。それが一つですね。それからもう一つはフィリピンなんかの場合は日本だけではなくてヨーロッパ、イギリス、アメリカにも大勢送ってるんですけれども、フィリピンで医師だった人が看護師になる、看護師だった人が介護士になるというふうに免許一段落として仕事を選ぶのが非常に多いケースだそうです。ですからフィリピンからフィリピンで取った免許は役に立つんですけれども、医者として役に立つのではなくて看護師として役に立つ、あるいは看護師として役に立つのではなく介護士として役に立つという妙な差別が起こっています。
欧米から入ってくる看護師たちもいますか？
ヨーロッパですか？それはいませんが、逆にですね日本で医学部に入れない人たちが、かなり大量にハンガリーに留学して、ハンガリーの医学部でお医者さんの免許を取って、でいろいろな国、日本も含めていろいろな国で医者になるっていう現象が起きています。で先ほどのフィリピンのケースに戻しますと、フィリピンは優秀なお医者さんや看護師の人たちが外に出てしまっているので、フィリピンの国の中の医療が空洞化して今非常に大変な状態にあるそうです。
2つの質問なんですけれども、すみません、つまりなるんですけれども、移民法語教育の600時間と富永先生がおっしゃったんですけれども、ドイツ語の場合、B1 を取るための時間数なんですけれども、日本語の場合、そういうやっぱり枠まだ決められてないんですけれども、でも読みかけだけが問題になってるんじゃないかなと私は思ったんですけど、仕事としてはなんですけど、別に会話するのに、もう600時間ぐらいはもう足りるはずじゃないかなと私は思ったんですけれども、読みかけだけが問題になってるんですよね。そうすると、自立して社会生活を営む、どういうことを結局意味してるか表してるか、それはちょっとわからないですよね。
日本の場合は、話し言葉のテストの方法が、いくつかあるんですけれども、アメリカで開発されたアクトフルっていう4の方法で日本に長く住む人たち、5年ぐらい住む人たちを100人ぐらい調べた 研究があるんですね。でそれで見るとアクトフルは大きく4段階に分けるんですけれども、その4段階のうちの、1、2、3、4と仮にしますと、1っていうのが、アメリカやドイツの大学の1年生のレベル、話し言葉のレベル、2が大体2年生、3が3年生、4が4年生って大きく、大体そういう分け方なんですよ。それで日本に長く住んでいる人たちで、2のレベルに達する人がほとんどいない、話し言葉であっても、つまり複雑なことが言えないレベルにとどまる。というのは、おそらくは副文がうまく作れなかったり、助詞がうまく使えなかったりするので、難しい複雑な事柄が話し言葉でも伝えることができないという結果が一つ、研究結果が出てます。それから書き言葉に関しては、簡単な仕事でも日本はドイツと同じにやはり書くことによって進んでいくんですけれども、話せるようになってから書く練習するっていうのはドイツ語に比べて非常に大変なんですね。文字の数が多い、ひらがな、カタカナだけでも非常に多いというので、それで、話し言葉だけで600時間やるっていうのはあまり意味がなくて、やはり話し言葉と書き言葉をこう同時並行しながらメモが取れるっていうようなことを、それから聞いて自分が知ってることをしゃべるっていうことはみんなできるようになるんですけれども、知らない状況について話すとか、自分の解釈じゃなくて誰かが言ったことを正しく伝える、そういうような訓練をしていかないといくら長く練習してもしょうがなそうだと。ですからその600時間っていうのはドイツとはまたちょっと別な組み方をしなくてはならないだろうし、そこで問題なのはやはり文字、極端に言えば漢字で、先日から冗談で漢字廃止論を言ってますけれども、かなり振り仮名をもうつけるとか何かしないと、簡単な例えば介護の仕事をしたい人ができないっていうような状況も生まれていますので、ドイツとはちょっと違う形での何時間になるか分かりませんけれども、B1、提案率を考えるべきかなと思いますけど、お答えになったでしょうか。
他の人も